The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Willow Creek, Montana, on that fateful autumn day in 1875, forever changing Josephine Zale's life. The bullet wasn't meant for her husband, Thomas, but the robbery at the Wells Fargo office had spiraled out of control, leaving her a widow at 26 with 2 small children and a mountain of debt. 3 months later, Josephine stood in the crowded market square, her worn leather purse clutched tightly in trembling hands. The shopkeeper's words still rang in her ears. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Zale, but your credit's run out." The small stack of essentials she'd selected for her children, flour, beans, a precious orange, remained on the counter as she backed away, tears streaming down her face. "Madam," a deep voice cut through her shame, "everything all right?" Josephine hastily wiped her tears, turning to face a tall stranger, his features shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. "I'm fine, thank you," she lied, though her voice betrayed her. The man stepped forward, revealing sun-weathered features and eyes the color of a summer sky. "Quincy Samuels," he said, tipping his hat. "Couldn't help but notice you seem troubled." "It's nothing," Josephine insisted, her pride refusing to bend even as her stomach knotted with hunger. Quincy glanced toward the shopkeeper, then back to her tear-stained face. Without another word, he strode to the counter, placing a gold coin down with a decisive clink. "Add whatever the lady needs to her order," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Sir, I can't accept," Josephine began, but Quincy shook his head. "Consider it a kindness between neighbors," he said, his voice gentle despite his imposing frame. "Times get hard for everyone sometimes." The shopkeeper, suddenly all smiles, began packing Josephine's items. "And add some sugar and coffee," Quincy added, placing another coin on the counter. "And that doll in the window for the little one." Josephine's eyes widened. "How did you know I have a daughter?" A small smile tugged at Quincy's lips. "The way you looked at it earlier, same way my sister used to look at things she wanted for her girls." Josephine clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders, uncertain whether to feel grateful or humiliated. "I don't take charity, Mr. Samuels." "Not charity," he corrected, helping the shopkeeper bag her items. "Just one person helping another. I'd hope someone would do the same for my family." When they stepped out into the bright Montana sunshine, Josephine finally found her voice again. "Thank you, but I have no way to repay you." Quincy smiled, revealing a dimple in his right cheek. "No need, Mrs. Zale. Josephine Zale," she supplied, shifting the packages in her arms. "Mrs. Zale, let me help you with these." "Where's your wagon?" Josephine hesitated, then admitted, "I walked from my farm. It's about 2 miles east." Quincy's eyebrows rose. "That's quite a journey with packages and children." "My children are with a neighbor today," she explained. "I thought it would be easier to shop alone." "Well, my horse can carry us both and your supplies. That is, if you don't mind the company on your journey home." Josephine studied him, noting the clean but worn denim, the calloused hands, the honest eyes. Everything about him suggested a working man, not some dandy looking to take advantage of a widow. Still, she'd learned caution the hard way. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Samuels, but please call me Quincy, and I understand your hesitation. How about this? I'll accompany you to the edge of town, and if you feel comfortable by then, we continue. If not, I'll leave you be." His consideration touched her. "That seems fair." Quincy's horse, a magnificent chestnut gelding, stood patiently at the hitching post. After securing her packages, Quincy offered his hand, helping Josephine mount before swinging up behind her. "His name's Rusty," Quincy said as the horse began moving. "Best partner a man could ask for." "He's beautiful," Josephine replied, trying to ignore the strange comfort she felt with this stranger's presence at her back. It had been months since she'd been this close to a man, and the solid warmth of him made her realize how lonely she'd been. As they rode through town, Quincy kept a respectful distance, his hands on the reins giving her space. "New to these parts?" he asked. 3 years, Josephine answered. "My husband Thomas and I came from Pennsylvania. He had dreams of building a cattle ranch." Her voice faltered. "He died this past autumn." I'm sorry for your loss, Quincy said, his voice genuine. Ranching alone is hard enough with a partner. We barely got started, Josephine admitted. Just a small herd, our house, the barn. Thomas had such big plans. They reached the edge of town and Quincy slowed Rusty to a stop. Decision time, Mrs. Zale. Would you prefer to continue on foot from here? Josephine considered. There was something trustworthy about Quincy Samuels, something that eased the constant knot of tension she'd carried since Thomas's death. I'd be grateful for the ride, she finally said, relief washed over his face. Glad to hear it. The sun's mighty high today. As they continued east, the town giving way to open prairie dotted with homesteads, Josephine found herself sharing more than she'd intended about Thomas's death during the bank robbery, about their struggling farm, about 7-year-old William and 4-year-old Emma. The bank's threatening foreclosure, she admitted. Without Thomas, I can't manage the cattle properly. They've been steadily disappearing, stolen or wandered off, I can't be sure. Rustlers, Quincy said grimly, been a problem in these parts lately. I wouldn't know how to catch them even if I tried, Josephine sighed. I can barely keep up with the daily chores. What about hiring help? Josephine laughed bitterly. With what money? I can barely feed my children. They rode in silence for a moment before Quincy spoke again. I might have a proposition for you, Mrs. Zale. Josephine stiffened. Mr. Samuels, nothing improper, he quickly assured her. I've been looking for work. I'm good with cattle, horses too. I could help get your ranch back in order. I told you I can't pay. Room and board would be payment enough for now, Quincy said. When the ranch turns a profit, we could discuss wages. Josephine twisted to look at him, suspicion clouding her features. Why would you do that? You don't know me. Quincy's gaze was steady. I know what it's like to lose everything. After the war, I came west with nothing but Rusty and the clothes on my back. Someone gave me a chance when I needed it most. I'm just passing on the favor. The war? Josephine asked softly. Quincy nodded. 4 years with the Union cavalry. Came home to Tennessee to find my family farm gone, parents dead from fever. I'm sorry, Josephine murmured, understanding his loss in a way few could. It was a long time ago, Quincy replied, though the shadow in his eyes suggested otherwise. Point is, I know cattle, I know hard work, and I know what it means to need a helping hand. They crested a small rise, and Josephine's homestead came into view, a modest cabin with a faded red barn behind it, surrounded by fields that needed tending. A small corral held a few horses, and in the distance, Josephine could make out the scattered forms of her remaining cattle. That's it, she said, feeling both pride and despair at the sight. Not much to look at anymore. I see good land, Quincy observed, strong buildings and plenty of potential. Josephine smiled sadly. Thomas used to say the same thing. As they approached the cabin, the door flew open and 2 children raced out, followed by an elderly woman. Mama. Emma cried, her blonde braids bouncing as she ran. You're back early, Mrs. Zale, the older woman called, her eyes narrowing at the sight of Quincy. Josephine slid from the horse with Quincy's assistance, immediately kneeling to embrace her children. Mrs. Holloway, thank you for watching them. This is Mr. Samuels. He was kind enough to give me a ride home. Quincy tipped his hat to the older woman whose suspicious gaze didn't waver. Madam. Will offered me cookies, Emma announced, pointing to Quincy. Who's that, Mama? This is Mr. Samuels, Josephine explained, smoothing her daughter's hair. He helped Mama at the market. William, tall for his 7 years with his father's serious eyes, studied Quincy warily. Are you staying for supper? Before Josephine could respond, Quincy crouched to the boy's level. That's up to your ma, but I was hoping to talk to her about working on your ranch. I hear you might need some help with your cattle. William's face brightened. You're a cowboy. Can you teach me to rope? William, Josephine chided gently. If your mother agrees to hire me, I'd be honored to teach you, Quincy said, his smile genuine. Mrs. Holloway cleared her throat pointedly. Mrs. Zale, I should be getting back to my own place before dark. Of course, Josephine said, reaching for her purse. What do I owe you for today? The older woman waved her off. We'll settle up Sunday at church. You think on this arrangement carefully," she added with a meaningful glance at Quincy. After Mrs. Holloway departed, Josephine turned to Quincy. "You're welcome to stay for supper, Mr. Samuels. It's the least I can do after your kindness today." "I'd be obliged," Quincy replied, already unloading her packages from Rusty's saddlebags. Emma tugged at his pant leg. "Do you like stew? Mama makes the best stew." Quincy smiled down at her. "I surely do, Miss Emma. And I bet your mama's is delicious." The small cabin was neat but sparse, with worn furniture and faded curtains. Quincy removed his hat upon entering, revealing thick dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. While Josephine prepared a simple stew with the fresh supplies, Quincy entertained the children with stories of his travels across the Western Territories. "Have you ever shot a bear?" William asked, eyes wide with excitement. "Once," Quincy admitted, "but only because he was threatening my camp." "Usually, animals will leave you be if you respect their space." "Papa was teaching me to shoot before he went to heaven," William said solemnly. Josephine's hands stilled on the carrots she was cutting, and Quincy's eyes met hers across the room, filled with compassion. "Well," Quincy said carefully, "that's an important skill out here. Perhaps, if your mother permits, we could continue those lessons someday." William nodded solemnly. "I need to protect Mama and Emma now." "That's a fine sentiment, son," Quincy replied, his voice gentle. "But remember, even the man of the house needs help sometimes." Supper was a livelier affair than the Zale household had experienced in months. Emma chatted constantly. William asked endless questions about cattle ranching, and even Josephine found herself laughing at Quincy's story about the time he accidentally rode his horse into quicksand and emerged looking like a mud monster. As darkness fell, Josephine lit the oil lamps while Quincy helped clear the table. "I should see about bedding down in the barn," he said. "If you're still considering my offer, that is." Josephine hesitated, looking at her children's faces happier than she'd seen them in months. "The arrangement would be temporary," she said firmly, "until I can determine if the ranch can be salvaged." "Understood," Quincy agreed. "I'll earn my keep, Mrs. Zale, you have my word." "Josephine," she corrected softly, "if we're to work together, you might as well use my name." A smile spread across his face. Josephine, then. The following weeks brought changes to the Zale ranch that Josephine had thought impossible. Quincy rose before dawn each day, repairing fences, rounding up strayed cattle, and methodically addressing the endless tasks that had overwhelmed Josephine since Thomas's death. He discovered evidence of rustlers on the north boundary and set up a schedule to patrol the property, teaching William basic tracking skills along the way. The boy flourished under Quincy's patient guidance, proudly helping with age-appropriate chores around the ranch. Even Emma adored him, especially after Quincy carved her a small wooden horse that became her constant companion. "It's Rusty's baby," she declared, making Quincy laugh with delight. Josephine found herself watching him when he didn't notice the way his hands moved confidently over leather and wood, how his smile always reached his eyes, the gentle way he spoke to her children. It had been so long since she'd allowed herself to notice a man this way, and the feelings both frightened and exhilarated her. One evening, about a month after Quincy's arrival, Josephine sat on the porch mending a shirt while watching him work with William in the yard. The boy was attempting to throw a lasso at a fence post, his small face screwed up in concentration. "Keep your wrist loose, that's it," Quincy encouraged. "Now throw." The rope sailed through the air, catching on the post, and William let out a whoop of triumph. "I did it. Fine job." Quincy praised, ruffling the boy's hair. "Your father would be proud." William's smile faltered. "Do you really think so?" "I know so," Quincy said firmly. "Any father would be proud of a son who works as hard as you do." Josephine's heart constricted at the exchange. Quincy had never met Thomas, yet somehow he knew exactly what William needed to hear. As if sensing her gaze, Quincy looked up, meeting her eyes across the yard. Something passed between them, acknowledgement, perhaps, of the strange family they were becoming. Later that night, after the children were asleep, Josephine joined Quincy on the porch. The spring evening was cool but pleasant, stars scattered like diamonds across the vast Montana sky. "I've been going over the accounts," she said, settling into the chair beside him. "If the next cattle sale goes well, I might be able to pay you a proper wage soon." Quincy took a sip from his coffee cup. "I'm not worried about that. Still, it's important to me," Josephine insisted. "I don't want to take advantage of your generosity. You're providing me a home, Josephine. That's worth more than money to someone who's been drifting as long as I have." She studied his profile in the moonlight. "Why have you been drifting? A man with your skills could settle anywhere." Quincy was quiet for a long moment. "After the war, I couldn't seem to stay in one place. Too many ghosts, I suppose. I'd work a ranch for a season, then move on when the memories got too close." "What memories?" Josephine asked softly. He turned the coffee cup in his hands. "The usual men I couldn't save, things I saw, the family I came home too late to help." He shook his head. "But that's old sorrow, not worth troubling you with." "It's not trouble to share someone's burden," Josephine said. "You've certainly helped lighten mine." Their eyes met, and Josephine felt a flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with grief or worry. Quincy seemed about to say something more when a distant sound caught his attention: horses approaching. He rose swiftly, hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Stay here," he said, voice suddenly hard. "Quincy, please, Josephine, get inside and check on the children." The urgency in his tone brooked no argument. Josephine hurried inside, peering through the window as 3 riders emerged from the darkness. Even from a distance, she recognized one of them, Frank Donovan, the bank manager who held her mortgage. Quincy stood firm on the porch steps, hand resting near his gun but not drawing it. "Evening, gentlemen," he called. "You're out late." Donovan dismounted, a tall, thin man with cold eyes. "Samuels, heard you'd taken up residence here." "I work for Mrs. Zale now," Quincy replied evenly. "What brings you out this way after dark?" "Business with the widow," Donovan said, his tone making the word widow sound vulgar. "Not with hired help." The door opened behind Quincy as Josephine stepped out. "Mr. Donovan, what business could possibly require a nighttime visit?" Donovan smiled thinly. "Just checking on my investment, Mrs. Zale. Your payment is due next week, as I'm sure you recall." "I haven't forgotten," Josephine said coldly, "and you'll have it on time." One of Donovan's companions snickered. "That'll be a first." Quincy shifted slightly, positioning himself between Josephine and the men. "The payment will be made. Is there anything else?" Donovan's eyes narrowed. "Actually, yes. I've had an offer for this property, a very generous one. I thought Mrs. Zale might be interested in selling rather than struggling to meet her obligations." "I'm not selling," Josephine said firmly. "Be reasonable, Mrs. Zale," Donovan pressed. "A woman alone can't manage a ranch this size. You're barely keeping up with the interest on your loan." "She's not alone," Quincy interjected, his voice deceptively calm. "And the ranch is doing just fine." Donovan laughed. "Is that so? Well, I suppose sharing her bed has certain advantages." He never finished the sentence. Quincy moved with startling speed, grabbing Donovan by his shirt front. "Apologize to the lady," he growled. "Unhand me," Donovan sputtered, his companions reaching for their weapons. "Quincy, don't," Josephine pleaded, stepping forward. "He's not worth it." After a tense moment, Quincy released Donovan, who staggered back, straightening his rumpled clothing. "You'll regret that, Samuels," he hissed. "The only thing I regret is not throwing you off this property sooner," Quincy replied. "Now leave before I forget my manners entirely." Donovan mounted his horse, glaring down at them. "1 week, Mrs. Zale. Then we'll see who's staying and who's leaving." With that, he wheeled his horse around, his companions following as they galloped into the darkness. When they were gone, Josephine's composure crumbled. "He'll never let me keep this place," she whispered. "He's wanted it from the beginning." Quincy turned to her, his anger fading to concern. "What do you mean?" Thomas took the loan from Donovan's bank because it was the only option, but the terms were terrible. After Thomas died, Donovan started coming around, suggesting I sell to him directly. When I refused, the accidental cattle losses began. Understanding dawned on Quincy's face. "You think Donovan's behind the rustling?" "I can't prove it," Josephine said, wrapping her arms around herself. "But the timing is suspicious." Quincy's jaw tightened. "We'll catch them in the act." "I've been tracking their movements. They always come from the north, through the canyon." "Even if we catch them, it won't matter if I can't make the payment," Josephine said, despair evident in her voice. "How much do you need?" $50 to cover this month. "But even if I make that, the next payment comes due so soon after." Quincy was quiet for a moment. "I have savings, not much, but enough to cover this payment." Josephine shook her head firmly. "No, you've done enough already. I won't take your money too." "It's not taking if I'm investing in our future," Quincy argued, then seemed to catch himself. "The ranch's future, I mean." The slip hung between them, neither acknowledging it directly. Finally, Josephine spoke. "Let's focus on catching the rustlers first. Maybe that will buy us some time with the bank." Quincy nodded, though concern still shadowed his features. "We'll set a trap tomorrow night." The following evening, after the children were asleep, Quincy and Josephine positioned themselves near the North Canyon, hidden among the rocks with rifles at the ready. The night was clear but moonless, perfect for rustlers and for catching them. "They usually come through just after midnight," Quincy whispered, his shoulder pressed against Josephine's in their hiding place. Josephine nodded, trying to ignore the warmth of him beside her. "What if they don't come tonight?" "Then we try again tomorrow," Quincy replied simply. "However long it takes." They lapsed into comfortable silence, the vast Montana night spreading around them. After a while, Josephine spoke again, her voice barely audible. "Thank you." "For what?" "For staying, for helping us, for—" She hesitated, "for making me feel safe again." In the darkness, Quincy's hand found hers, warm and calloused. "I should be thanking you, Josephine. You gave me something I'd forgotten existed." "What's that?" "A home," he said simply. "A purpose beyond just surviving each day." Before Josephine could respond, Quincy tensed, squeezing her hand in warning. "Listen," he breathed. In the distance, she heard the soft sounds of men and horses moving carefully through the canyon. Quincy raised his rifle, motioning for Josephine to stay low. 3 riders emerged from the shadows, moving toward the cattle grazing in the north pasture. As they came closer, Josephine recognized one of them, Jim Harper, one of the men who had accompanied Donovan the previous night. Quincy's lips thinned. "Just as I suspected," he murmured. "What do we do?" Josephine whispered. "We wait until they start gathering the cattle, then we confront them." The rustlers worked efficiently, separating a small group of steers from the herd and beginning to drive them toward the canyon. When they were fully committed to their theft, Quincy stood, rifle raised. "That's far enough," he called, his voice echoing across the valley. The rustlers froze, then scattered, reaching for their weapons. A shot rang out, kicking up dirt near Quincy's feet. He returned fire, aiming high as a warning. "The next one won't miss," Quincy shouted. "Drop your weapons." 2 of the rustlers hesitated, but Harper spurred his horse, charging directly toward their position. Quincy pushed Josephine down just as Harper fired again, the bullet whistling over their heads. With deadly precision, Quincy took aim and fired. Harper cried out, clutching his shoulder as he tumbled from his horse. The other rustlers, seeing their leader fall, threw down their weapons. "Josephine, keep them covered," Quincy instructed, moving to secure Harper, who was moaning on the ground. "You've made a big mistake, Samuels," Harper growled as Quincy bound his hands. "The mistake was yours," Quincy replied coldly. "Stealing from a widow and her children, that's about as low as a man can get." "Donovan will ruin you both," Harper spat. "He owns this county." Quincy hauled him to his feet. "We'll see about that." By dawn, the rustlers were locked in the town jail and Josephine was giving her statement to Sheriff Taylor, a gruff but honest man who'd been friends with Thomas. "So Donovan's behind the rustling?" the sheriff asked, eyebrows raised. "Harper admitted it," Quincy confirmed. "Said Donovan wanted to drive Mrs. Zale off her land by any means necessary." Sheriff Taylor sighed heavily. I've suspected Donovan of underhanded dealings for years, but this is the first solid evidence. I'll send a telegram to the federal marshal in Helena. This goes beyond local matters now. Josephine felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. What about our payment? It's still due next week. Given the circumstances, I can get the bank to grant an extension, the sheriff assured her. Especially with Donovan likely facing charges. As they left the sheriff's office, the town was just beginning to stir, shopkeepers opening their doors, farmers arriving with produce for the market. Josephine felt Quincy's hand at the small of her back, guiding her through the early morning crowd. We should celebrate, he suggested, a smile lighting his tired face. How about breakfast at the hotel, my treat? Josephine laughed, feeling lighter than she had in months. I should get back to the children. Mrs. Holloway has been with them all night. Of course, Quincy agreed, helping her onto Rusty's back. Another time, perhaps. The ride home was quiet, both of them exhausted but content. When they reached the ranch, Mrs. Holloway greeted them with raised eyebrows but no questions, simply informing them that the children were still asleep before taking her leave. You should rest, Quincy said as they entered the cabin. I'll tend to the morning chores. You need sleep too, Josephine protested. You've been up all night, Quincy smiled, touching her cheek gently. I've gone longer without sleep, but I'll rest once the essential work is done. Something in his touch, in the tenderness of his gaze, made Josephine's heart race. Without thinking, she rose on tiptoe and pressed a soft kiss to his cheek. Thank you, Quincy, for everything. He caught her hand as she began to pull away, his blue eyes intense. Josephine, he began, his voice rough with emotion, I need to tell you something. What is it? She asked, suddenly breathless. He hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. I care for you, more than I should, perhaps. I know it hasn't been long since your husband passed, and I would never presume to replace him, but Josephine pressed her fingers to his lips, stopping his words. Thomas will always be part of me, she said softly. He gave me my children, my home, but he would want me to be happy, to live fully. She took a deep breath. And you, Quincy Samuels, make me remember what happiness feels like. The joy that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Quincy lowered his head until his lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it brought tears to her eyes. When they parted, Quincy rested his forehead against hers. I never expected to find a home here, he whispered, or a family. Neither did I, Josephine admitted. Not again. A sound from the children's room broke the moment, Emma calling for her mother. Quincy stepped back, his smile understanding. Go to her, we have time. The next week passed in a whirlwind. The federal marshal arrived, questioning Donovan and the rustlers. Charges were filed, not only for the cattle theft but for fraud and extortion as well. The bank temporarily closed, with a trustee appointed to manage its affairs until a new manager could be found. Through it all, Quincy remained at Josephine's side, a steady presence as they navigated the legal proceedings and the curious stares of townsfolk who'd heard rumors about the widow and her cowboy. On Sunday, they attended church together, the children between them like a ready-made family. Mrs. Holloway sniffed disapprovingly, but most of the congregation was supportive, especially after hearing how Quincy had helped catch the rustlers. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, William and Emma playing in the yard, Quincy took Josephine's hand. I've been thinking, he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm, about the future. What about it? Josephine asked, though her racing heart suggested she already knew. I'd like to stay, Josephine, not as your hired hand, but as… He paused, gathering his courage. As your husband, if you'll have me, Josephine's breath caught. Quincy, are you certain? We've known each other such a short time. Some things you just know, he said simply. I've wandered for years, never finding anywhere that felt right until I saw you crying in that market. Something told me then that my searching was over. The children, I love them already, Quincy assured her. I would raise them as my own, teach William everything his father would have wanted him to know, watch Emma grow into the beautiful, strong woman she'll become, just like her mother. Tears filled Josephine's eyes. People will talk, they'll say it's too soon. Let them talk, Quincy said, lifting her hand to his lips. All that matters is what feels right to us. Josephine looked at her children, at the ranch that was slowly coming back to life under Quincy's care, and finally at the man himself, patient, kind, steadfast Quincy, who had appeared when she needed him most. "Yes," she said softly, then with more conviction. "Yes, I'll marry you, Quincy Samuels." His face lit with joy as he gathered her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that promised a lifetime of love. 2 months later, on a perfect summer day, Josephine and Quincy were married in the same church where she had once mourned Thomas. William stood proudly at Quincy's side, and Emma scattered wildflower petals down the aisle. Sheriff Taylor gave the bride away, and even Mrs. Holloway dabbed at her eyes during the ceremony. As they exchanged vows, Josephine thought of that day in the market, how close she had come to giving up, how a stranger's kindness had changed everything. Now that stranger was her husband, promising to love and cherish her for all his days. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Quincy's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise fulfilled. When they turned to face their friends and neighbors, Josephine saw nothing but joy and approval in the faces before them. That night, after a small celebration at the ranch, after the children were tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Josephine and Quincy stood on the porch of what was now truly their home. "Happy?" Quincy asked, his arms around her waist as they gazed at the star-filled sky. "More than I ever thought possible," Josephine replied, leaning back against his chest. "You gave me back everything I was losing: my home, my hope, my future." Quincy turned her in his arms, his eyes serious in the moonlight. "You did the same for me, Josephine. I was just existing before I found you. Now I'm living again." As their lips met in another kiss, Josephine silently thanked whatever fate or providence had brought this man to her side on that desperate day. What had begun with tears in a market square had become a love strong enough to rebuild a ranch, heal broken hearts, and create a family from the fragments of shattered dreams. And in the years that followed, as their herd grew, as more children joined their family, as William became a fine young rancher, and Emma, a spirited young lady, Josephine never forgot that it had all begun with a cowboy who paid everything to save a widow in tears, asking nothing in return but eventually receiving the greatest gift of all, a love that would last a lifetime.